You've entered Bookstorm. Your favorite authors are here to dive down deep into their best-selling books. Stay tuned to brave the storm.
Well, welcome back, listeners, to BOOKSTORM Podcast. We've got you all over the world in 94 countries and territories in all 50 states, and that's because we are bringing you the very best authors. And today we have one of the best. We are so excited. We have #1 New York Times bestselling author, Mark Greaney. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Oh, we are just so excited. I want to tell our listeners just a little bit about your background. They probably already know a lot of your work, but I want to make sure they do because it's pretty interesting. First of all, the international thriller, The Gray Man, came out in 2009. It became a bestseller. It became a movie. And I think this is the 14th installment. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
In your series? Wonderful. And we love The Gray Man on Netflix. You can catch it there now, listeners. And did I hear there might be a sequel coming out and possibly even a spin-off series?
That's what they're saying. I'd love to hear more myself, but yeah, that I know that there is a second one in the works, and there's talk of doing a spinoff as well.
Oh, I hope so, because Ryan Gosling, Chris Evans, Anna de Armas, they were in the original movie. Fantastic. I encourage all of our listeners to watch it and pick up the book. Now, I want to tell them a little bit more about you. You are also the best-selling author or co-author of 7 Tom Clancy novels, including True Faith and Allegiance. We, of course, love those novels. I've read, I think, almost every one of them. You collaborated with Tom Clancy on 3 Jack Ryan novels before his death in 2013. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Now, you also have other standalone thrillers that are bestsellers. We've got, first of all, Red Metal. It is a military thriller that was written with Lieutenant Colonel Rawlings with the Marine Corps. That was a bestseller in 2009. Also, Armored and Sentinel also came out, I think, last year, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Wonderful. Well, welcome. We're just thrilled to have you. And
Thanks.
I think Julia was going to tell us just a little bit about the story we're here to talk about today, Midnight Black.
I do. I have a summary, and I promise I won't give any spoilers away. And feel free to add anything at the end that maybe I glossed over or something that you think is really imperative to the story. At the start, we encounter the Gray Man. Cortland Gentry, he's in a dark place at this time. His lover, Zoya Zakharova, has fallen into the hands of the Russian intelligence service, and the CIA is convinced that she was executed. The one thing keeping Court Gentry going is his repeated belief she's not dead. He's going to find her. He spent 6 months trying to bribe, bully, and kill his way into Russia to rescue Zoya. Now, there's only one move left to him, and it's something only a crazy man would try. An organization of anti-communist believers who once helped political dissidents escape from the Soviet Union. It is a desperate ploy, but if he can reactivate the chain of agents who've been dormant for 30 years, he's got a shot. But crossing the border is only the first of his problems. If Zoya is anywhere, she's in IK-2, Yavas, a former Stalinist gulag in the icy cold 700 miles from the nearest border. And we really liked this quote. It's a place where dreams and prisoners go to die. If he's going to get Zoya out of there, he's going to need help. But this is the kind of help that has the ability to start a war. Did you have anything to add, Mark?
No, I thought that was good. I need to use that. I'll write it down.
We'll send it over.
Yeah.
All right. So if we're ready to dive on in, we do have some questions for you that cropped up about the themes in this book. To start, Lieutenant Colonel Dvorak of Russia's GRU, Russian military intelligence, swore to protect the Rodina, the Russian motherland. He was a true believer in communism. He was groomed for this position, literally since he was a child. When ideology, any ideology, is rooted that deeply, is there any hope of personal growth or a flexible mindset? We were curious on what this means for the future of Ukraine and other former Soviet Bloc countries. Is this just a setup for endless conflict?
Well, specific to the book, I created Colonel Dvorak with the GRU, which is Russian military intelligence. The way I created him, this guy who is an absolute true believer in his cause, because I wanted to sort of differentiate with the other villain, Baranov, who is a colonel in the FSB, Russian Internal Security. Those two guys are sort of at loggerheads, and whereas Dvorak is very much, a slave to the cause and believer in the cause, Baranov is just a pragmatist. He doesn't really believe in the cause. He doesn't believe in anything, but he knows, he has to do what he has to do for his job. And I wanted to sort of create that dichotomy because you see both of these mindsets in authoritarian states and such like what's going on in Russia right now. And I've done a lot of research on that sort of thing. And those are the kind of the prevailing ways. There's people that believe and there's people that don't believe, but know how to keep their head on their neck. And so that's why I did that in the book. I definitely think there's hope for personal growth, and I don't think that everybody has a fixed mindset that can't become a flexible mindset along the way. In the case of Ukraine and Russia, Vladimir Putin is driving this war. The average Russian doesn't want the war. Now, I see all the time people do man on the street interviews with the average Russian, and they say, "What do you think of the war?" And of course, they're very much for it, but they're in a police state, so that's really skewed information, and really shouldn't be taken at face value. I think it's very much the case that in the first few days of this war, this was going to be Russia's 3-day war in Ukraine, and at the time, I think probably Russians were very much for it because they're absolutely force-fed a diet of propaganda, as we all are. And in that 3-day war, which is now entering its 1100th day, coming up pretty soon, I think the mindset has really changed from something everybody was behind to now it's beginning to affect people not only in the steppes and 18-year-old kids in the Ural Mountains who are sent into the meat assaults in Ukraine to die. Now it's affecting people in St. Petersburg and the other Moscow and other places as Ukraine attacks deeper and deeper. So I really think there is a change. I don't feel like people are completely enslaved to the ideology they're born into or that's fed them. I mean, you look at imperialist Japan. I mean, I don't think anybody in 1943 ever thought the Japanese would think any way differently, but that ideology changed. Look at Japan today and look at Hitler in Germany and look at Germany today. So I do believe that there's hope, but these are really dark times.
Absolutely. And there's so much to unpack there. Thank you so much for a thorough answer. What stuck out to me was you said that this was something that we had to catch up on. And now it's at the forefront of, people's minds, our political strategies. And I mean, my husband is in the Canadian Army and his units are concerned about it too. So it's like kind of here at this
Yeah.
time. And your book is such a, like Mom said earlier, I'm sorry, that is my mother. So
Okay.
I just call her Mom, but as she said earlier, that this is such good timing because this is really what's happening in our houses. So
Mhm.
it's something
Yeah.
that we're all concerned about,
Yeah.
to an extent.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And also the fact that these wars are fueled by ideology, not
Mhm.
necessarily a political board or a need for certain resources. These ideologies are widespread and spreading. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
very
When there's this top down, uh, when the top leaders are telling you who your enemies are, I think it's always very, very dangerous and very perilous. And that's always done for some sort of a reason. In Putin's case, it's very much his internal situation and his own kind of aspirations for, wars of conquest and, recolonizing the former Soviet Union and things like that. So that's all in his brain. And I don't think the average Russian really wants anything to do with that.
Yeah. I want to dive a little deeper into something you had said. First of all, Milda Berzina. I loved this character in your story. She had been brainwashed to believe in the USSR first, Russia, and then her own country. But she became very disillusioned over time. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about what contributed to her thinking differently about things. Was it a lot of education that she was pursuing? Was it the fact that things started to happen to her personally, as you alluded to with, 18-year-olds in the Ural Mountains? What do you think was changing her mindset?
Well, in the case of Milda Berzina, she is a Latvian. So And she's also, I believe she's 75 years old or something of that nature. I'm a big fan of Cold War novels. That's where I first started, reading Tom Clancy and Graham Greene and Lynn Dayton and Gerald Seymour and Frederick Forsyth and Le Carre, and I could go on and on. So those are the books that I really, really love to read. So I wanted this book to be kind of an homage to like an old style um, Cold War thriller. And so that's why as I was trying to figure out how Court would find his way back into Russia, would make his way back into Russia, I thought, wow, what if we went back to the 80s and there was sort of an old network, like a rat line of dissidents who could help him. And, obviously they're up in years, but these are, some of the bravest people that have, ever in the last century. And I did a lot of research on these groups and these people. And personally, I've been to the Checkpoint Charlie Museum in Berlin and the secret police headquarters in Budapest and the one in Vilnius, Lithuania, and one in Bosnia, where you see all the dissident groups in the former East Bloc countries and how they were oppressed. And so that's where I got the idea for Dr. Berzina and other characters. And as far as what changed her ideology, yeah, so these people in these East Bloc nations in the 1950s and 60s and 70s and even in the 80s were pushed to believe in the Union, in the Soviet Union. And of course, Moscow is at the center of that. But then there was lots of really egregious things that happened, and some people learned. And I don't think it's education, because I think people can be really well educated and come to all the wrong conclusions. We see that here in America, and we see that anywhere in the world. I think it has more to do with how these things affect you. And I guess, maybe in Dr. Brzezina's case, getting the right information at the right time in her developmental life, maybe. I think I wrote that she was in her 20s and she was a professor and started to hear about the Prague Spring and learn about things that had happened, in the Soviet Union, and kind of the scales came off her eyes a little bit. I think I was in China once doing research on a Tom Clancy novel. And I every day I had a different tour guide take me somewhere, and they were all sort of state sponsored tour guides. So they have little microphones in the car, and they're giving you the party line and all that. And one day I just got some college student to take me around and show me things, and he said something that really stuck with me, and it kind of made its way into this book. He said that he felt like there was progress in China, because he's like, today our government lies to us. He just said this very matter-of-factly. Our government lies to us about everything, but in the old days, they just wouldn't even say anything. So I feel like that's progress. It's really sad that he thought that was progress, but it's that thing that, he wasn't completely brainwashed by what was going on around him. It was the life he had to live in, but he wasn't brainwashed by that. So I wanted to create a character in Dr. Brzezina of somebody who's really learned what's really out there and what's below the propaganda.
Yeah. And as you alluded to, looking at what happened in the 1980s, I think is essential for understanding what's happening today with Ukraine. And
yeah,
very
absolutely.
observant.
Yeah, absolutely. The past is prologue.
And I have to compliment you as well. I think you executed this throwback to the 80s seamlessly, because in the beginning, I didn't even know what time period we were in. I was like, wow, this is kind of harkening back to how things really were done in the past, which comes with a extra layer of interest, because in the past, we know how things worked out. So there's some certainty there when you're reading. And now in this modern age, we don't know what's going to happen in the real world or the book. So that was interesting to me. It stuck out.
Thank you.
I guess we'll move on to our next question. Court Gentry, the gray man, has a very poignant discussion with a Russian resistance cell leader. Court says to him, "And no more talk of dying. Let's have some hope. It's a powerful thing. It's good for you and it's good for your people." And the leader replies, "Our people." The leader seems to be speaking to our common humanity and our universal need for freedom. Can you address or go into a little bit more depth of this exchange between them?
Yes. So the rebel leader is a guy named Denis Maskeyev, who's a young man who is a former Russian soldier, fought in Ukraine, was wounded, and he's also very much against the the government in power in Moscow. And when I wrote this book, every other book, this is my 26th published novel. I think in every other book, I've tried to write the world the way it is, or the way that I think it will be when the book comes out, which is always the little dance that you have to do. And I'm always looking at things very geopolitically and trying to figure out where it would be so I can be as accurate as possible, get as few hate emails from people saying that I got this wrong or that wrong. But it's kind of like where my mind likes to go and build that. But for this book, I did something very different. I sort of created a little bit of an idealized situation. I wanted to write it how I wanted things to be. And so this resistance group in Russia who's fighting against the government, I've made them, I guess, a lot more robust and organized and effective than what's really out there. And honestly, even the way the West is combating or I guess aiding Ukraine, and it is a lot more idealized than what we're really seeing. I have a little more cynical outlook on how we're handling ourselves, and the book is a little bit more hopeful. And maybe it's the way things will be in the future, maybe not, but that's the way I wanted to write it. So when I wrote this rebel character, I created him as someone who's completely disillusioned. And he's also very combat hardened. And so he has these young men and women who are in his force. And at one point he tells them, just sort of the best way forward. And I've heard this from people who have worked in rebel forces and other groups, that the best way forward is to just know that you're going to die and just make peace with that and then go forward and do your job, because otherwise you would just be too hesitant. And so he actually kind of pushes that to his forces. And then Court comes in, the American comes in and says, don't do that. Let's all try and have hope, because I think that's actually more powerful than, walking around thinking that you're a dead man walking and just here to do your job. And I wanted to, there's a lot of sort of disagreement and mistrust between the two groups. I think it's very, you look at any time the United States has worked with some rebel group or foreign group anywhere in the world, we don't have a great track record of sticking with them, doing what we're going to say, defending them, protecting them. We use groups to our own designs, and then we get out of there, unfortunately, more often than we should. So I didn't want to create this, butterflies and rainbows relationship between the West and the rebels in this. I think that if there was some interaction like this, a CIA officer, a former CIA officer working on the ground with rebels, there would be a lot of mistrust. So they would have to do things to earn one another's trust. And that was sort of a fun part of creating this relationship between these characters, because they need one another, but they don't completely trust one another.
Absolutely. I think that theme was prevalent even from the start with Court and the Romanians, and everybody is trying to prove that they are looking out for those other interests,
Right.
which is interesting because everyone has their own goals in mind.
Yeah.
So that's awesome.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask you, I loved the interactions between Matt Hanley, a CIA station chief, and his boss, Trey. And I want to ask you about this. Matt previously had Trey's position, but lost it. And I won't go into any detail and give anything away there. But Matt says to Trey, and this is a quote, "I know what you're going through. You see that there are jobs the agency can't take on that still need doing. And it doesn't make you a cowboy if you find expedient means to solve problems." Now, that moral dilemma kind of runs throughout your story. There's a lot of people wrestling with what ought to be done, how it should be done. And I want to ask you about that, because what do you think is guiding Matt in his thinking? Is he thinking we need to oppose evil by any means possible? And do you think that's kind of a similar justification that maybe the Soviets or the Russians are using?
Yeah. So you bring up a good point. I mean, the reality is any sub rosa use of intelligence or paramilitary or anything like that, outside of the lines or outside of the light of day can absolutely be corrupted and misused and misplaced. And as a fiction writer, I have the luxury of instilling the morality that I want in the characters. And so Matt Hanley is a good guy in the entire series, but he has worked outside the lines. The Gray Man himself is a sort of former CIA officer who kind of works as a contract agent, but he's a very lethal asset, and he's not, working. There's no sort of government oversight in anything that he does. And the reality of that is pretty spooky when you think of it. But when you're writing a book with good guys and bad guys, and that's how you do it. And so Matt is this character who, I won't say he's morally ambiguous, because he's always trying to do what's right for the United States, but throughout the whole series, throughout the 14 books, he's not always trying to do what's right for court gentry. And sometimes it's been very much against that. But he is definitely a true believer and a patriot, but has been kind of misdirected at different times by his leadership or by what he thinks is going on. So in this conversation, Trey Watkins is the deputy director of operations, and Hanley used to be deputy director, but he kind of lost his position, was sent out into the wilderness because of something that happened in an earlier book. And now he has this relationship with the new DDO, and he also has access to the gray man, who has the potential to really help the CIA. And Watkins is not ready to go sub rosa. He's not ready to do things off book or outside of the lines. And Hanley throughout this book is basically talking to him, going, the time is now. You have to make a decision, and if you want to get something done, you have to get it done this way. So, I love playing when I wrote with Tom Clancy books. I was always thinking about the morality of these sorts of things. My editor, Tom Colgan at Berkeley, he and I love talking about this stuff over a beer, about how realistic is this, and how quickly could the good guys become the bad guys, and the bad guys become the good guys in a situation like this. So we love sort of playing in that moral gray area and thinking about it. But in this book, Matt Hanley's intentions are very good, and Trey Watkins, sort of need to cover his butt is something that I really wanted to create as another point of tension in the story, where he has to sort of stick his neck out and help the plot go forward.
Yeah. I'm going to confess, I was reading this and I was like, I want to ask him about this issue because I've seen it in your other writing, in the movie, everything. And that is there an absolute good and bad, right and wrong? And your plots and your stories are riveting, they're entertaining, but they also provoke some of those very deep questions that we have to ask ourselves at some point. And that's not easy to do, especially in these kinds of contexts where at first you think, of course, there's a right and wrong.
Yeah.
So I love that. I love that you play with that theme and have for a
Yeah.
long time.
Thank you. Yeah, it's always fun when you're writing to write the books that you enjoy reading, and I've always enjoyed books that there is some maybe some melancholy at the end, or there's some scratching of the head going, is this the way that you really want things to work out, or is this a partial victory, and things of that nature. So this I wouldn't say there's not a right and wrong. I would say that, my version of right and wrong is skewed by my past and my feelings and my sense of morality. But I'd like to think I know more or less what's better. But, reality is, I study the news, and I've been interested in politics since I was, a preteen, and world affairs. And so, there's really hasn't been too many just perfect sticking the landings in geopolitics. So I think I like that sort of morally gray area.
Mark, out of my own curiosity, over the course of any of your writings and your research, have you ever gotten the opportunity to interview or talk to a CIA agent in any capacity, former, retired, just to discuss these situations and what they would do or anything like that?
Sure. Yeah, I have a lot of former CIA officers who are friends or acquaintances that I've reached out to and talked to. And sometimes we talk about a lot of times it's very specific stuff, obviously, that we talk about, like how this would work, or, what they serve in the cafeteria on the second floor, or, things of that nature that, I'm sort of asking them about. But yeah, we do, over a beer, talk about the, kind of the morality of it all. I think everyone who's done that job has been jaded, and I don't think there's anybody out there walking around thinking they're James Bond, or that they're some sort of Marvel character or anything like that. That's not really the reality. People always say, is there really a guy like the Gray Man in the CIA? And I'm like, there's a group called the Special Activity Center that is their paramilitary force. And I know several of the guys who've done that before. So that's as close as it gets. But the reality is, if you look at actual CIA operations, where in my book, where I'll have Court and maybe one friend roll up some terrorist cell, the reality is there's 1,100 people and 12 satellites and, the State Department and all these other groups that are involved in the same thing. So, the reality is a lot more complicated, but, you can't really write a book completely real, because I wrote a book one time and I had a guy from Delta Force helping me with an opening part, and he was telling me what was wrong with it, because he's like, this guy would call him by this code name, and he'd have this call sign with this guy and this and this and this. And I'm like, well, we're on page 6 and I have 7 different names for the main character. I'm like, I can't tell a story that way. So the reality has got to be something you kind of leave at the door as you create these stories.
Absolutely. Kristen, did you have anything further that you wanted to ask just before we probably wrap up?
No, I just wanted to see if you could give us a clue of what you're working on next. I know we've got series coming out and something else. What about with your writing?
Yeah, right now I'm working on the 15th book in the Gray Man series. And so I'm going to go do some research overseas. I'm going to Northern Ireland, and then part of it takes place in the United States. So there's some domestic locations I'm going to do. I'm going to write that this year. And then after I finish that one, I'm going to start a different one, which is going to be, I think, a standalone novel or maybe part of a new series. We'll see. And so I really only have one book I have to turn in this year, but I have 2 books I have to work on. So I'll stay really busy.
That sounds wonderful. We hope you come back and talk to us about those, Mark, because we've
Love
loved talking to you. I feel like we could talk to you for like 3 hours about these issues.
I enjoyed
Um,
it.
I'm going to tell our listeners how to get in touch with you. MarkGreaneybooks.com. That's your website, and it's Greaney. It's a fantastic website. They can get links to everything else that you have written and that you're involved in. You're also on Facebook, on X, on Instagram. And again, we just thank you for coming on the show. We loved your book, and we wish you all the success in the world with it.
Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Take care now. Yeah, I'm going to have to say, I think that Mark is so on point with what he is talking about in this story. It entertains, it thrills, but it also brings up the big questions of what's happening in the world. And there's just so much there that you can mine. But I love it because I think you had pointed this out to me earlier. We have a character who we know a lot about this character. There's a lot of depth to him. And now we see him encountering things in his life, lost love, people he cares about, big things happening on the world front. And it kind of all comes together in this book, which I thought was really cool.
It does. Earlier, I think we were talking about how hope is required to press forward, and you can't go into things thinking that you're going to die or that you're not going to. You kind of just have to give your all. And what was curious about this character from the very beginning was that he had an extreme recklessness. He didn't care what happened. He said it himself. He's like, I'm going to kill everyone here. There's not going to be any heroes or survivors. Yet he had a goal that he needed to stay alive to get to. So he rode that line so very thinly of, I have something that I have to do, but I also don't care how I get there to do it. And
Yeah.
that type of playful suspense throughout the entire book was prevalent.
Oh, absolutely. I would agree with you. Again, this book is entertaining as it is really cool. So,
It is.
well, I want to tell our listeners about some other fantastic authors that we have coming up. We've got John Shannon with Boys Town, Jesse Rosen, All the Signs. One of our first nonfiction books is coming. We have Dr. Samra Zafar with Unconditional. She is amazing. We cannot wait to talk to her. Alex Hay with The Queen of Fives. Allison Raskin, Save the Date. We have Carter Wilson, Tell Me What You Did. Jill Shelvis, Better Than Friends. Marshall Karp, Don't Tell Me How to Die. Tess Gerritsen, she's coming back for the second time, The Summer Guest. Robert Crace, The Big Empty. Brian Freeman, writing for Robert Ludlum, The Born Vendetta. He's coming back to the show again. Robert Dugoni, Jeff Langholtz, and Chris Crabtree with Hold Strong. And Alka Joshi also coming back, 6 Days in Bombay. Listeners, we are growing every week. We're so grateful for you. We ask that you follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, on Instagram, on X. We are on TikTok. We're on YouTube. In fact, I on YouTube, you can see our authors with these really amazing videos, and we think you'll enjoy them. But we're just grateful that you're here along for the ride with us. So we want you to stay tuned because your favorite authors are here on Bookstorm Podcast.